Welcome to the Bible Forum. I'm Warren Sprouse. It's Sunday night. We're here every Sunday night. This is the last Sunday in June. We're going to jump right into July, 4th of July. Next weekend means my dog's going to be barking all over the place and in bed with me all night while all the fireworks are going off. But I'm glad you're here. Glad you spent some time with me. I wanted to update you a little bit on what's going on. Before I do, I want to make sure that you are signed up to receive our weekly rundown of topics. That's an email that I send out once every Saturday to let you know what the topics are for this week. If you'd like to get that, you just need to send me an email. Send it to thebibleforum@gmail.com. Tell me what you'd like to have. That email will go out every Saturday. Nothing else comes into your inbox, so send out all kinds of stuff. We've had a busy week, and it just continues. I spent most of today, my spare time, or the time that I did have, looking at emails and websites and different things that come into my computer, and this whole thing just keeps boiling and rolling and going. I mean, there's just more stuff to talk about than you can shake a stick at. But I have issues. I have personal issues. The question that I have most rambling around in my head is, why has my Facebook page been blocked? Why did Facebook suddenly stop letting me have access to the Bible Forum Facebook page? I don't know if you're used to going there, post the videos. It's about the only thing I did, and I haven't been able to get to it for a month. And I've concluded that they blocked it because they could. There are other issues, I'm sure, but it was reminded this week when Facebook whistleblower Zach McElroy said that he would testify before Congress about the Facebook bias, the bias that he witnessed against Trump supporters and conservative causes. He said 75 to 80% of the posts selected by Facebook's algorithm for content moderator review revolved around support for President Donald Trump, support for Republicans, and for conservative causes. The Facebook content moderator on targeting Trump supporters said, if someone is wearing a MAGA hat, I'm going to delete them for terrorism. Facebook's review lead said it's a very progressive company who's very anti-MAGA. I'm concluding that Facebook's human-directed restriction of free speech raises questions regarding the company's protections under Section 230 of the 1996 Communications Decency Act. And I want my website back. But of course, that's just me. There is more. Things are going on in the world. It's not revolving all around me. Arizona-based Facebook content moderator Ryan Hartwig is another employee of something called Cognizant, a third-party company that Facebook contracts to conduct content moderation. And he's now speaking out. He said he was in a meeting. The journalist, apparently in this meeting, said they were able to fire him without having to worry about discrimination. The human resources executive, a person by the name of Leslie Brown, commented that that was due diligence. We could fire him because, well, he's a white man. No problem. You can do that easily if there are other issues. The journalist said, oh, it's easier when they're white, Brown said. The journalist said, yeah, not a protected class. Brown said, no one has the white man's back anymore. Do you see it? Of course you do. It's clear that social media giants think they can get away with just about anything, and they are largely right. But there are folks, there are organizations working to expose them and change things. The organization Project Veritas is one of them. If you don't have that coming into your inbox, you need to put it in there. ProjectVeritas.com. They have a lot of things that are of interest. An article about New York City, about New York's Governor Cuomo, talking about vandalism. Tearing down, lighting a fire, spray painting obscenities on America's historic statues and monuments, he says, is merely a, quote, healthy expression of rage. That from the rioters rampaging across these United States. And he appeared to be serious. In an interview on NBC's Today Show, Cuomo said people are making a statement about equality, about a community against racism, against slavery. And I think they're good statements, he added, that it was possible to overdo it, but that he didn't think that that was the case in New York. And I think it's a healthy expression, he said, of people saying, quote, let's get some priorities here. Let's remember the sin and mistake that this nation made, and let's not celebrate it. End of quote. Not sure what that sin is. Patrice Cullors is co-founder of Black Lives Matter. She proudly admits that she is a radical, anti-white Marxist. She has said publicly that we actually do have an ideological frame. Myself and Alicia, her partner, are particularly trained organizers. We are trained Marxists. We are super versed on ideological theories. According to her, Black Lives Matter is seeking to transform America by defunding the police, dismantling capitalism, destroying the patriarchy, breaking down the nuclear family unit, emptying prisons, redistributing wealth in the form of reparations, among other far-left objectives. And here all along you thought it was all about race. You thought it was all about power, didn't you? Black Lives Matter and Antifa rioters have destroyed small businesses, they have targeted churches, they have razed buildings to the ground. Their goal is to bring chaos where there is order, fan the flames of class warfare, and demonize Christians as well as conservatives. Not to make a better life for people of color, but as she says, to further an anti-white Marxist agenda. See, in a Marxist society, no one is safe who is not an overt Marxist. A prominent leader in Black Lives Matter, a fellow by the name of Hawk Newsom, says, burn it down. What's he talking about? Well, he was on Fox News this past Wednesday. He told that group will, quote, burn down this system, end of quote, if its demands for change are not met. He is president of Black Lives Matter of Greater New York. He joined Martha McCallum on her program to discuss nationwide protests and riots since the death of George Floyd in Minneapolis last month. He said, if this country doesn't give us what we want, then we will burn down the system and replace it, all right? And I could be speaking figuratively. I could be speaking literally. It's a matter of interpretation. He continued saying, let's observe the history of the 1960s when black people were rioting. We had the highest growth in wealth, in property ownership. He's talking about the black community. Later in the interview, he described Jesus Christ as the most famous black radical revolutionary in history. Jesus was a Jew. Jesus was treated, he says, just like Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. He was arrested on occasion. No, he wasn't. And he was also crucified or assassinated. This is what happens to black activists. We're killed by the government. So now black activists are the same as Jesus Christ, God incarnate. Comments were in reference to activists who have targeted statues and monuments to vandalize, to destroy. Now this man is linking the imagery of Christ to black power. Hawk Newsom is a 43-year-old black man from the Bronx. He lists himself as a Christian. He's trained as an attorney, and he's president of Black Lives Matter, New York. He has one son and one daughter, but does not reveal his marital status nor his wife's name, if he has one. His net worth, $360,000. Here's an article under the heading, Things We Already Know. The Black Lives Matter movement has left-wing ideological goals. That's according to one of the movement's co-founders, one who previously admitted to being a political activist driven by Marxism. Many BLM supporters, he says, considers the movement to be a moral one that exists outside of political squabbling. But in a 2015 interview with the Real News Network, Patrisse Cullors, who founded the organization in 2013, along with Alicia Garza and Opal Tometi, identified herself and Garza as trained Marxists. I told you that earlier on. The website, however, declares that the organization's desire is to disrupt the Western prescribed nuclear family structure. This desire to dismantle the concept of the family, she says, is one of the Black Lives Matter movement's share with fallen communist state of the Soviet Union. Keep in mind, family is God's foundation of society. With family, the society is secure. Without family, there's chaos. In a 1926 issue of The Atlantic, an anonymous female resident in Russia revealed the regime's attack on the family unit, writing, quote, "When the Bolshevik came into power in 1917, they regarded the family like every other bourgeois institution. That is, they regarded it with fierce hatred, and then set out with a will to destroy it. Other communist policies that Black Lives Matter support include dismantling capitalism, redistribution of wealth, despite the fact that an estimated 94 million people died as a result of communism between 1900 and 2000. Former FBI Assistant Director Terry Turchi claims that BLM's goals and origins share quite a few similarities with radical left-wing organizations from the 1960s and 70s, such as the Black Panther Party, which he said was, quote, tied to at least 36 murders of police officers across the country, as well as Weather Underground, another terrorist organization, with one former member who has direct ties to Black Lives Matter. This former FBI official further explained what he believes BLM is really about. He said, "This is racism, used as an issue to spark the revolution. It's meant and it is intended to be divisive, dividing the country." Under the heading of, "Is it okay to be angry at God for the coronavirus?" The author of this piece says, "We've probably all heard a fellow Christian say it. It's okay to be angry with God. He's bigger than your anger. He can take it. However, are we blameless in our anger toward God? I would add that we're sinning against God if and when we direct our anger toward Him. Think about it. Where's the anger toward God for alcoholism? For automobile crashes that kill millions? For domestic battery and or killings? For AIDS? Or the spreading of AIDS? There is no anger toward God in these because these are all products of sin. And it is Satan who introduced sin into the world and into the species. And yet people will glorify Satan in music, in art, in clothing, language, in any way they can. At the same time, they will denigrate, or worse, ignore God. Can you see the logic of this? No? Then you're probably part of the solution. Up in Washington this week, in the House of Representatives, a bill proposed would ban chokeholds and drug-related no-knock warrants for all federal law enforcement agencies. It would effectively strong-arm state and local governments into doing the same by tying federal funding to the prohibition of these practices. It also would create a national police abuse registry and make procedural changes to allow more persecutions and lawsuits aimed at individual officers in cases where misconduct has been alleged. The bill passed in the House 236 to 181. All the Democrats, as well as 3 Republicans, voted for it. Republicans Will Hurd of Texas, Fred Upton of Michigan, and Brian Fitzpatrick of Pennsylvania. Oh, it's not going anywhere. A few weeks ago, a Revolutionary War monument was vandalized. It was a representation of a Polish hero. The headlines this week: Polish President Duda begins his visit in Washington, D.C. by paying tribute to a proponent for the abolition of slavery, a distinguished son of Poland and a hero of the American Revolution. We remember your sacrifice. Who's he talking about? He's talking about the Polish hero who was illustrated in the war monument that was vandalized. According to Smithsonian Magazine, this Polish-born war hero was a central player in many of our fledgling nation's military victories. His name, Kosciuszko. He shared the sentiments of freedom and liberty with American rebels, was attracted to the battle like a magnet. He offered his services as a military engineer to Continental forces and was welcomed with open arms. Kosciuszko's skill and wit would frustrate British assaults, harden the defenses of American forts, saving countless lives. Owing to his love of freedom, the Polish engineer was also a fierce advocate for the abolition of slavery. In his will, Kosciuszko directed that his American holdings be used to buy the freedom of some of Thomas Jefferson's slaves. Considering Kosciuszko's history, it seems protesters who defaced the monument had no idea who the war hero was. Nor did they care, apparently. There was an interview on Fox News this week with Senator Tim Scott. He's our senator here and Republican, and if you didn't know it already, he's a black man. He said Democrats didn't even try to make an effort to consider Scott's police reform bill called the Justice Act last Wednesday, even after he had offered 20 amendments to make it more palatable. Scott is the only black Republican senator in Congress, and he's been working on this legislation for 5 years. He knows firsthand what it feels like to be targeted by cops just because of the color of your skin. He showed his emotions on Fox and Friend last weekend. He accused the Democrats of playing pure politics and letting the opportunity to make real change pass them by. He made the additional point that most of the poorest cities and communities in America, as well as those cities that have devolved into chaos after the police killing of George Floyd, are all run by Democrats. But the fact escapes the Democrats. They believe they're going to win in November, so they would rather write their own reform bill without any input from the Republican Party, Scott said. So now, we'll move on. People will forget about it. And you know what's going to happen? Something bad. And Scott says we'll be right back here talking about what we should have been doing. Here's an article under a category of things I just don't understand. The reality is there are people in this country who cannot afford many of the luxuries our society affords for a multitude of reasons. However, a large percentage of dark-skinned young people are carrying expensive cell phones, wearing large necklaces and other jewelry, driving cars, drinking alcoholic beverages, all of which costs lots of money. What they apparently don't have are computers and internet connections at home. Here's a headline. Racial disparity in access to computers and home internet connections could exacerbate the achievement gaps that existed before the pandemic. Black and Hispanic students could face even greater setbacks, with Hispanic students losing 9 months, black students losing 10 months. Now for me, I've been around on this planet for a long time, 77 years. Aside from over 35 years as a pastor, I have worked in industry, I have worked with police department, I have worked in retail and commercial environments. In each case, I have worked side by side with dark-skinned men and women. Men and women that were doing and are doing the same job as I, being paid the same wages as I. Several have been paid more. But there's a significant percentage that did not live the same as I. They did not own their own home. They did not put their children in private school as we did with our children in a Christian school. They do not have the same financial and familial safety net as I have. And the point? It is a father's God-given responsibility to provide for his family. Every father. If you don't have that ability or desire, don't marry. Don't have children. Both of these are life choices. They're not accidents. They're not magical. They don't just happen while you're asleep. You make choices. What this means is a father gives up things he'd like to have in favor of that which is most important to his family. If he loves his family, he will give, expecting nothing in return. He will work 2 jobs if that's the only way he can do it. He will sacrifice, he will suffer to provide for his family. Oh, and if he can't afford 5 children and a wife, he does what's necessary not to have 5 children and a wife. No, not abortion. Self-control, wisdom. Items that are apparently in short supply today. Here's a statement from Justice Clarence Thomas on DACA. You know what DACA is? The Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals. DACA is not a policy voted on by both houses of government, but rather a presidential directive by former President Barack Obama. Justice Clarence Thomas ripped his colleagues last week for blocking President Trump's request to end the DACA program. DACA is talking about childhood arrivals illegally at the border. He wrote, quote, "Perhaps even more unfortunately, the majority's holding creates perverse incentives, particularly for outgoing administrations. Under the auspices of today's decision, administrations can bind their successors by unlawfully adopting significant legal changes through executive branch agency memoranda. Even if the agency lacked authority to effectuate the changes cannot be undone by the same agency in a successor administration unless the successor provides sufficient policy justifications to satisfy the court." In other words, the majority erroneously holds that the agency is not only permitted but required to continue administering unlawful programs that it inherited from a previous administration. The decision to countermand an unlawful agency action is clearly a responsible behavior. So long as the agency's determination is illegally So long as the agency's determination of illegality is sound, our review should be at an end. He said the majority's opinion supports the idea that a president is not only permitted but required to continue administering unlawful programs that it inherited from a previous administration. So what's going on here? What happened? What happened was a majority of justices sided with emotion over law. They said the government did not follow proper procedure, apparently, in how they brought this to the High Court. Chief Justice Roberts explained that, quote, "the proper procedure was President Trump's reasons for canceling the program." So what were the reasons? He said the reasons were arbitrary and capricious. To cancel an unlawful presidential order with a lawful presidential request is arbitrary, without cause or reason, and capricious, meaning impulsive. Sort of like jailing people who burn down police buildings or run over people with their cars during an unlawful demonstration of protest. The program was initiated capriciously. A president who wanted more uninformed and dependent voters regardless of the law. And there is no law to back this up. Here's a message for liberals. You football fans, remember Herschel Walker? Well, Herschel Walker would like to have a word with you. Walker, having racked up huge totals as a Heisman-winning running back at the University of Georgia, a Pro Bowler, and the NFL's Dallas Cowboys standout. He started his pro career in the NFL rival United States Football League with the New Jersey Generals, a team that was owned by Donald Trump. His links to Trump have made Walker's politics more prominent these last few years, which is why his modest proposal to police defunders is getting some attention. He said on Wednesday, "I have an idea. For all these people who don't want any police, I'd love to meet with American Airlines, Delta, and Southwest and make a deal to fly them to countries that don't have police. You see, I just want them to be happy." And finally, where there's hope. Reverend Ruben Diaz Sr., a social conservative, pro-Trump Pentecostal pastor, is the lead among 12 Democrat contenders for New York's 15th congressional district seat. The Washington Examiner calls this, quote, the most liberal congressional district in the country, end of quote. A May poll conducted by the liberal think tank Data for Progress found Diaz leading the crowded field by 22%. That's the news this past week while you were busy doing other things. We'll come back in a minute and look at what's right and wrong in the 21st century. Stay with me.